Friends and enemies, good morning. We are doing a first ever here on CBP. Coffee Sip and Rip. My name is Joey, brought to you, of course, by EasyDNS, Full Bitcoin, and 256 Heat. You want to host the domain or domain, marks your guy, easydns.com. CBP Media is the code. Bull Bitcoin, buy and sell Bitcoin, pay your bills. Excuse me, I'm still sick. Buy and sell Bitcoin, pay your bills, other stuff as well. Cheaper and more private and non-custodial than anywhere else. We love it. Go there, use our code CBP, get 25% off your fees. And of course, over at 256 Heat, you can heat with... My miner's running right now. It's hot in here because the door's closed, but we are hashing. KYC free Bitcoin. Making sure everything is warm. We like that. 256heat.com. Okay. Some stories I want to talk about that we might not cover this week on the Monday show. First off, the CZ. Free CZ. I love this picture. This is so funny. I don't know if you guys saw that video of Trump talking about how he had just pardoned CZ. Doesn't really know why. Doesn't really know who CZ is by the sounds of things, and was getting advice from people in his campaign or in his cabinet or in his circle, or who knows, maybe just people on Twitter with that guy to pardon him. So CZ out ringside at the UFC event. You gotta love that. What a shot. What a shot. But not every story is going to be that easy and that friendly today. We got a few other ones that I want to talk about. One is related to the demographics in America. So this is from Zero Hedge and the Epic Times. Excuse me, Epoch Times, Epic Times. I'm not sure which one it is, but there's obviously a lot of talk about this, United States and Canada and every Western country getting older and older. And this one says the decades-long phenomenon is creating a demographic squeeze that some anticipate will affect nearly every aspect of the nation's economy and infrastructure. I do think that's true. I'm not sure that it matters the way that some modern economists want to talk about. Fertility rates are lower for sure, and we're seeing a change in the age of our populations. And part of me says that there's going to be negative repercussions there. Of course there will be. We want more babies, but population can't really grow naturally through childbirth unless costs come down. We've seen this all over the place, and guys like Dan Hess, more births on Twitter, has talked about this. You need an opportunity to raise a family, not just to have a baby, and right now we're not getting any of that. The interesting thing, I think, given all these sort of discussions and topics around long-term care and resources and the strain that's going to put on systems, I think the thing to keep in mind is that Germany is really the canary in the coal mine for this. Germany, for a long time was talking about we need more immigrants to pay for our retiring population. This sort of idea that we're going to have people living in retirement for 30, 40 years in some cases, as opposed to 10 or less, which was the intent of the Social Security safety net, let's call it, for a long time. But as we've seen in Germany, what's actually happening is they're asking people to work longer because immigrants, specifically third world immigrants from recent years, just don't contribute to the economy. It's a fact at this point. And so you can call me a racist, xenophobe, bigot, whatever. It makes you stupid, not me. They don't contribute to the economy at the level that they need to support the social safety net. And they're also not improving the overall demographics. People are coming, especially in Canada. We've seen, I don't want to call it chain migration because I don't think that's the term, but if someone in their 40s or 30s comes in, they're allowed to bring in 3 people who are in their 60s who will immediately contribute to pressures in healthcare and in social security costs without ever contributing. It's ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. And what we need, actually, I think, is a significant drop in population for a short time, and certainly a decline in immigration, if not an outright moratorium for, I think, decades at this point is probably the right answer. But these are unpopular things to talk about still in Canada, although they are becoming more popular little by little. But anyway, something to keep in mind. More and more people are talking about this because they're, if you're my age, you're coming up to, I don't want to say coming up to retirement. I'm still 20 years away probably, but the big thing to keep in mind is now you've contributed to a system through what basically amounts to wage garnishing for 30 years. 20 years, 25 years, depending on how long you've worked. You know, a lot of people my age started working, they were 13, 14, 15 and paying taxes on their income. And, you know, are you going to get it? The question isn't really one of if, it's how much, and that how much looks to be a more and more raw deal by the day. So keep this in mind. We'll be talking about this, I'm sure, as that story continues to develop. So there's a few other ones I want to talk about here. Let me pull up another link. Tons of talk these days about Carney and the Liberals and the unwillingness, it seems like, to drop the green stuff from the agenda. So this is from Conrad Black. It's in the National Post. It's interesting to hear, you know, what is the best way to put this? We have guys who are basically mainstream columnists, let's say. I mean, Conrad Black, obviously famous for a number of reasons at this point, but mainstream columnists and mainstream papers calling for the dissolution of green initiatives from government, ledgers. We can't continue to pretend that we have these opportunities to contribute to the global environmental benefit through things like neutering the economy, destroying jobs, refusing to build pipelines, et cetera, et cetera. We'll talk a bit about some of the stuff going on with pipelines in a minute, but there is now a broad call, including from places like CBC and CTV, who are doing panels where it's becoming less and less likely that the panelists hide their true feelings on whether or not greenwashing every single policy position, certainly the economic ones, is a good idea, or trying to greenwash them is a good idea. It seems to me like the Overton window on this has shifted quite a bit. And the reason it's shifting quite a bit is because people are feeling the pain. We hear stories all the time of Canadians are no longer traveling to the US. It's sort of painted with this elbows up stuff, this elbows up veil, let's say. But, you know, people are not staying home because they have a particular distaste for Trump. They're staying home because they can't afford to go anywhere. And I think you see this because it's not just travel to the States that's, you know, quote unquote down. It's travel internationally into other locations as well. So Canadians who are famous for being snowbirds and going, especially to places like Florida, just no longer going, they can't afford it anymore. I see this in my own life. I know some seniors, retirees, fixed income types who are no longer able to travel. And it's not because they care that much. It's because they just don't have the money. And part of the reason they don't have the money is because we've chosen to sacrifice productivity at the altar of climate change. And we actually see this a lot. You know, Carney obviously wrote the book Values. I have not read it, but many people have, including people who listen to this show. And I'm told that this, you know, so far the policy positions that Prime Minister Carney has taken are true to form from what's in that book. You know, it's interesting. I'll just read an excerpt here from the article. The casual person attending the CD Howe discussions, CD Howe's a think tank, would have no idea that if the federal government does not promptly promise a serious plan to build pipelines, Alberta wants and does not start to defend the rights of cultural minorities in Quebec and elsewhere, then there will be more than Stephen Harper's cool-headed conjuration of serious problems. And neither reflected that Quebec is purporting to write its own constitution, having claimed to have abolished any status for English language in Quebec, including federal government offices. Only the importation of large numbers of Haitians, North Africans, and Lebanese to replace Quebec's post-Christian collapsed birth rate with some sort of francophones, but people relatively uninterested in Quebec nationalism might prevent an independence victory in the next referendum. So you're talking about national unity here in a lot of ways, and it's easy to talk about Alberta because they're sort of front of mind, but what you're actually seeing is that Quebec is also considering leaving the Confederation, and they have, I think, almost more reason to than Alberta does. Let's talk a bit about CPI in the States for a moment. Actually, we'll go to in the sort of same thread here, this talk about Alberta sovereignty. So this is from Marty up north. Canada is so broken that provinces like Alberta now have to legislate their own federal rights just to stay in the game. If you needed more proof that Canada's federal system is cracking at the seams, look no further than Alberta's freshly tabled bill, the International Agreements Act. Introduced just this week as the province's top legislative priority, this bill isn't some radical separatist idea. It's a desperate bid to claw back basic constitutional rights that Ottawa has been taking away from the province for years. At its core, Bill 1 declares that no international agreements signed by the federal government, trade deals, climate pacts, or resource sharing accords can automatically bind Alberta unless the province explicitly consents. This is big, and I think it's appropriate because Alberta is obviously a resource-heavy. It's a giant. It's one of the biggest oil fields on the planet, and they want to build pipelines. On one side, they have EB. On the other side, they have the Ottawa crowd, the capital crowd, and whether it's the Laurentians or the sort of extremists in British Columbia, no one seems willing to help them build a pipeline. So naturally, they're saying, well, if you're not going to help us, we're going to do it ourselves. Albertans are less than 30 years removed from huge budget surpluses, huge oil checks in the mail for every voter, every voting age man, woman, and child, and they are looking around the world, especially at places like the UAE, who basically goes all in on oil and resources and lives in a gold palace, so to speak. Now, there's obviously some differences there culturally, politically, but the fact of the matter is we're wasting resources and wasting time trying to pretend that we're not an oil superpower and a natural resource superpower. Guys like Rich Diaz have talked about this a lot. We mentioned it on the show over the years. This is what causes separatist uprising, not, gender ideology, not social hot button issues, not vax passports. It's stuff like this. This is the stuff that will persevere and last through the hot topics of the day. This is important stuff. And I think Alberta making a move here that is going to prove to be maybe influential in other jurisdictions as well, but certainly for Albertans, this is going to be a big deal. I expect to see a vote there on separating inside of the next year or two, if not sooner. So let's go to some tariff news here. Obviously, Prime Minister Carney caught off guard by the news that we're going to be seeing a 10% increase in tariffs over this Doug Ford ad that he put out in the United States. I saw it watching football or baseball the other night, and I thought that's pretty weird that the government of Ontario is putting these ads in America. I just want to say that there's nothing wrong with running ads in a country that is rivaling you or giving you a hard time or otherwise inconveniencing you through trade deals and tariff negotiations and things like this. But the problem I have is that it doesn't seem to be a quality reading of the room in a lot of ways. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you've seen already Trump willing to push you over the edge to the point where your prime minister has to address the nation, on a cold February night. You may remember that last year or earlier this year when Trudeau had to talk to everybody on a Saturday night about the tariffs. We've seen already that Canada is not in a position to keep businesses happy. Stellantis, obviously the most recent example of this, even though they have agreements with the federal government and provincial government and labor unions and will almost certainly be sued and almost certainly lose those suits because they probably did violate some contract, it's still not worth it to stay here. And if you keep pushing higher tariffs and difficult trade negotiations and difficult business environments in the name of elbows up or the boomer voters who want nothing more than to stick it to Trump, even though, as far as like actually sticking it to America, the boomers not only have no idea how little they do, but do so little that no one in America cares about this. We are a wart on the ass of the American economy, regardless of what our leadership says in public settings. We can't keep doing this. This is not going to work for everybody. And, Dominic LeBlanc here, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, we stand ready to build on the progress made in constructive discussions with American counterparts. Will remain focused on achieving the results that benefit workers and families. Now we're sort of being forced to go to China. Minister Anand saying that we're a strategic partner of China. There's a lot to be said about that. I don't think there's a lot of Canadians who don't know that the PRC and the party over there and just Sam Cooper's research is not something that's top of mind. We are a target for these countries, specifically China. We've obviously been a hub for money laundering and long-term real estate investing from Chinese and Chinese government officials. And to me, it doesn't make sense to keep doing this. We will eventually be put in our place one way or the other. And I think that when the budget comes out in a couple of days, I think it's about a week away now, you're going to see two things happen. One, you're going to see a huge pushback from all the other parties to the point where you might see an election. I know Len disagrees with me on that, but I think you could actually see an election. And the other thing you're going to see is the long bond really rip, because people are not going to want to put their money here for any extended period of time. And you may also see the short end rip, which would be a complete disaster. We can't stomach rising interest rates in this country, unfortunately, due to decades of poor economic decision making. So all these things to say that the idea that tariffs are still happening to us, we're not actually playing a role in whether or not we can grow our economy or develop a competitive edge, and we're just kind of sitting back and saying things in front of microphones and not doing anything, it doesn't bode well for us and doesn't bode well for Canadians. One more story I want to talk about here, since we've talked about it in the past. This is from Kevin Gordon on Twitter. We have discussed this on the show, this idea that there are what I will call adjacent entries into CPI. So you may remember on one of the quick currents a few months ago, we were talking about how there's basically 3 eras of CPI data entry. One was pre-COVID, where only about 10% or a little less of items in the CPI were replaced with adjacent, or we'll call them nearby data points. So things that you couldn't get prices for replaced by something you could get a price for that's close enough, let's say. There's no real metric or rubric for these, obviously, but you have these sort of close enough entries. Then during COVID, it made its way up to 20 and 30%. And now here we are outside of COVID for the first time. 40% of the items in CPI were based on different cell imputation in September. That means data collectors had to fill in missing data by using values from related but different category or geographic area. So I want to just say 2 things here. One, this is inexcusable in a data market like the one we have. There's no reason why data should not be available in jurisdictions or for certain items in 2025. Doesn't make sense. The other thing is that when politicians, Trump specifically, says that CPI is being cooked to make him look bad or to keep rates high or whatever, this is why he's able to say that. He's able to say it because if you look at these numbers and you look at how they choose what adjacent items to put in, there's not really, like I said, a hard and fast rubric or a hard and fast way to assign these things. So naturally, there's room for politicization if you want. And if you allow stuff like this to become common to the tune of 40%, like the video or like the screen grab shows, yeah, you will get people saying that this is something that's meant to serve a function. It's meant to serve an end and not to be accurate. And I don't think you get a lot of argument from reasonable people there. Anyway, so that's it. That's Coffee and a Sip, RIP number 1. Don't forget to check out the sponsors, EasyDNS, Bull Bitcoin, and 256 Heat. And until next time, my friends, I will see you later.